DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy, family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574 today. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to Against the Boards. I'm your host, Chamberlain Bauder. Thanks to my producer, Paul Russo, for getting us up and rolling. And today, we're going to lead it off with some hockey, changing things up as we get back into the season. Of course, we are now into Game 3 for the Buffalo Sabres today of the NHL preseason, where they will take on the Detroit Red Wings. Seeing a lot of play from some of the younger Sabres currently, potential Amerks for next season. We also, of course, saw the Amerks post their player tracker for anyone deeply interested in what that Amerks roster looks like right now as time goes on with who's under contract, where people are under contract. You can find information there. I'll also go over it just in a second for you with the departures and some notable still unsigned free agents from last year's Amerks roster. But before we get into that, just some notable performances so far from Sabres preseason. Konsta Helenius with a goal and an assist game earlier on in play. Ultimately, I think the thing that's going to hurt Helenius is going to be his size. We'll see if ultimately Lindy Ruff cares that much about the size when he has a guy like Zach Benson already up there. I feel like when you already have Benson up there, you don't have much more space for another small guy. But if Helenius can keep performing the way that he has been so far this preseason, I think he definitely creates an opportunity for himself. But I don't think that forwards for the Amerks is going to necessarily be the problem. We'll talk about it more in just a second. Let's get into the Amerks departures and notable unsigned free agents before we get into anything else, show off some buckets from the preseason as well. But as we go to the list, this is all based off of the Amerks player tracker, by the way, so this is coming directly from the team. We're going to start out with players that have signed across the Atlantic. We've got one in Sweden, one in the KHL in Russia, one in... Actually, hold on. Correction. One Swiss, one Sweden, one German, and then one in Russia, and then another on the Winnipeg Jets. So Eric Brandstrom heads to Lausanne. An interesting situation there in my mind. You see Nicolas Aube-Kubel sign with the Wild, and then the guy that the Amerks traded for Aube-Kubel goes over to Europe and it starts playing. Alexander Kisakov was a guy that ultimately the writing was kind of on the wall last season. Just his size never kind of bulked up enough, and he never showed that lethal ability as a forward, really. He was one of those leaders in the locker room last year, but he wasn't one of the leaders on the ice in the same way. He heads to Moscow. Ethan Prow, someone who obviously leadership-wise is a key Amerk, but at the end of the day, watching him last season was kind of painful at different times. He just had clearly lost his step, and at the end of the day, when you've got the number of defenders that this squad has, which we'll get into in just a second, there's no place for Ethan Prow on this team. He heads to the Grizzlies in the Deutsche League, as we say it, for Germany. And then the one that I think, to me, is the saddest to see go, just as having watched the Amerks for the last 3 years and seen the impact that this guy has had, Lucas Rusek is now headed over to Sweden to play for HV71. Ultimately, a fantastic passer of the puck, but just every time he got that opportunity in the NHL, he never really took it and ran with it. And because of that, he ultimately doesn't get the NHL contract, and so he has to go elsewhere to continue his pro career. Someone who will be continuing their pro career in the NHL, though, Cale Clegg signs with the Winnipeg Jets on a 1-year contract. Ultimately makes sense for a guy like Clegg to go elsewhere where he will have the opportunity to make it into the NHL versus the Sabres lineup where it seemed clear based on how last year went that he's not going to get that big of an opportunity with the Buffalo Sabres. Notable unsigned free agents. There's 4 of them right now for the Buffalo Sabres. 2 of them goalkeepers, Michael Hauser and Felix Sandstrom. Ultimately just notable because they're the 2 guys that were both on the Amerks roster at the end of the season last year that are not under contract. Every other guy aside from the next 2 was with the ECHL team or was elsewhere in the league at the end of last season. But the captain of the Rochester Americans, Mason Jobst, is not under contract for next year, and assistant captain and constant first-line forward for the Amerks, Brett Murray, is also not under contract. Now, Jobst ultimately feels like one of those deals that might just get done very, very close to the beginning of the season for an AHL contract for this year. But Murray is a bit of an interesting one. He's still at an age where ultimately the opportunity for him to play in the NHL still should be looming, but at the end of the day, he has not proved to the Buffalo Sabres that he should be doing that ultimately. Despite that, he has the size to be a 4th-line bang body forward, but he has not really played like that in his time in the AHL or when he's gotten some minutes in the NHL. So, still not under contract. We'll keep our eyes peeled on that one. Before we get into some potentially prospective lines for the Amerks here, let's take a look at some beautiful helmets that came out of Sabres preseason, and I believe partially they were also worn in the Prospect Challenge. Scott Ratzlaff and Topias Lainen, both repping some Amerks buckets through their training camp experience. Honestly, I just love when the Amerks get their helmets. I think one of the weirdest things in the world is looking at the NHL colorway of a helmet with your AHL jersey on. And of course, they get the reverse issue here with wearing Sabres jerseys and having the Amerks helmets on, but some absolutely beautiful helmets. And I think the other thing that's nice about this is the sign of when guys are in Rochester, they're going to have some Rochester buckets. And I'm excited for that prospect as we get into this season of the Amerks. Just great. I love the contrast of them too, ultimately with the different center lines on them. Just great style for the Rochester Americans. Ultimately, let's talk a little bit about where the problems are going to lie in their lines, because I think the goalie room is one where it will just be figured out based on who's in the NHL and who gets sent down and who can be sent down based on waivers. But elsewhere, it's going to get a little bit complicated. We'll start by talking about the 3 likely controlled spots of lines for the Rochester Americans in next season. Now, a couple of players in those areas that will be maybe questionable for getting pulled up into the NHL at different times, staying up there, anything could happen. Might be that fringe guy that stays up there based on injuries and is the extra scratch guy, which a guy like Tyson Kozak, honestly, in my mind, at this point in his career with Seth Appert being on that bench in Buffalo, it would make a whole lot of sense to me for him to be that extra skater for them right now. So in my mind, I actually haven't even tried to fit him into the top 3 lines as a center because I don't know how much he's going to be in Rochester. And I also think at the end of the day, Rochester has 3 centers right now on their roster ready to go, barring them getting pulled up to Buffalo, and Buffalo's center situation is kind of the most controlled situation that they have out of all of them. So unless Noah Oslin's beating Peyton Krebs, then we aren't going to see too much change there. Now, that is entirely possible, but it won't be that Krebs comes down. So let's talk about it a little bit. At center, on those 3 center spots that are open, I have Noah Oslin, Josh Dunn, and Riley Fiedler-Schultz. Ultimately, line chemistry will then be another big thing that goes into this. I think the most consistent line that we're going to get is going to be a chance of Fiddler, Schultz, Slager, and Warren is a chance to bring chemistry from last year straight on to this season. And I think that would make the most sense as maybe a third line, maybe a fourth line. I think the other thing to remember very key for the Amerks, though, is they roll four. You're going to get the same number of minutes on the first line as you are on the fourth line. And on any given night, they might start the fourth line or the third line instead of the first line. So ultimately, you're going to get the same number of minutes anywhere you are. It's really just the matchups. Then the other thing that's going to come with it is, I think, slight pairings of players around these lineups in the top two lines in the fourth line. One of the things that will be interesting is if they don't re-sign Brett Murray, then Anton Wahlberg becomes your big guy. I think that size gives him a real chance to make it onto the first line for the Amerks, just to be paired up kind of as, yes, he can absolutely snipe it, but also as more of a bodyguard type player for an Oslin and an Isak Roseyan. So in my head right now, let's run through our top three lines. I've got Anton Wahlberg, Noah Oslin, Isak Roseyan, line one. I have currently Konsta Helenius, Josh Dunn, Victor Neuchev, line two. This one could get a little bit more interesting. I think this is where Kozak fits in on a wing, actually, with this line, if he's playing with the Amerks. I also think this is the thing with Konsta in this spot, is there is no way he should go up to Buffalo if there is a chance of him sitting multiple games in a row. It just doesn't make sense. So if that's even the possibility right now for him, he should be playing in Rochester. And I think it would be good for him to get some consistency on a line with a bigger center who has that AHL experience that can give him space to the inside, create more space for Konsta on the outside. And then I already told you that other third line, Fiddler, Schultz, Slager, Warren, just makes sense to me. Now, the reason I don't have a fourth line is because I'm about to list to you 7 defenders, and I want you to play a game as I list them to you. Murka, Rathbone, Komarov, Novikov, Johnson, Metza, Savage. That is 7 defenders. Can you pick one to scratch? I sound like Dora right now. That felt like a complete Dora moment, but I can't. I look at that and I think 2 things. One, we were looking at the lines earlier. If somehow, which I doubt that Kesselring is going to get knocked out of a spot in starting D, but a guy like Connor Timmins, a slight chance that someone could prove to be good enough with their improvement through the offseason and through training camp to take that spot. Then you don't have the problem. You've got your 6. But I would struggle to scratch one of these guys on a regular basis. For more than one game in a row, definitely would struggle to do it. So, as I look through it personally, I think 2 things. One, Zach Metza can play center on a fourth line. That's the first thing that pops into my mind. Second thing that pops into my mind is this wouldn't be the first time that the Amerks have run 7 defenders and 17 forwards and 11 forwards. Good Lord. 7 defenders and 11 forwards. It wouldn't be the first time. They did it in the playoffs 2 years ago under Apps. And the other thing, too, is you look at a guy like Savage, played under Leo in that program that everyone talked about his experience with Apps. It came out on the Amerks Instagram. He did an interview with Andrew Mossbrooks, and he talked about, yeah, I worked with Apps, but my coach for that program was Michael Leone. And he just had rave reviews to say about him, which was awesome to hear. So I think there's a consistent defender right there. Komarov and Novikov and Rathbone, all 3 of them have never shown anything other than that they should be constant Amerks when they are healthy on the ice. So now you're looking at Merca is the top 10 pick of the Sabres. He's got to get on the ice. Now you've got one spot between Ryan Johnson and Zach Metza. And Zach Metza's probably like, if there's no Mason Jobst, he's the captain of the team. Quite literally. So a lot of things to figure out in that defensive end of things. I cannot wait to have a conversation with Michael Leone, but also have a chance to see some of these things kind of figure themselves out a little bit more as time keeps going on in this preseason stretch. We'll know a lot more by next week. My goal for next week also is to give you an actual visual, so it's not just coming out of my mouth and doesn't actually make sense, and you can actually break it all down with a picture breakdown. But that's going to do it for our Amerks talk this week. Of course, today, Sabres preseason game 3 against the Red Wings, and a chance, unfortunately, we still are waiting to see the potential lines come out from the Sabres practice that they had today. I've been trying to be glued to beat reporters around Buffalo, and nobody wants to post the Sabres lines right now. So hopefully before the end of me talking about our next segment, I will have something on that for you for any prospective Amerks that are going to be playing tonight. But at the moment, the only key information that we have is that UPL is back playing after an injury that hampered him at the beginning of training camp. So that means, again, more chance for a Devin Levi Rochester season. Really anything up in the air as it comes to that note. So now, as I'm typing in the Sabres lines versus the Detroit Red Wings, we will transition over to our lacrosse conversation, as last week it was NLL schedule reveals. And of course, we got to go through everything for the Knighthawks schedule and break it all down. We won't necessarily go game by game, but we'll go segment by segment of their season and break it into the groupings that I kind of have for how this season will unfold. All right. We take a look-see at the start of a season in San Diego for the Rochester Knighthawks. They will open the season the second week of December on the road, taking on the Seals. And ultimately, I don't love that the Knighthawks have to start on the road, but what I do love is the way that their home opener gets timed. December 20th is right at that point where college Christmas break will be starting. So if you have college students that you're trying to encourage to come to games, they're right at the edge of, let me stay an extra day, go to this game, and come home. You also have anybody that comes home for Christmas break being in Rochester. Families can go to this game on a Saturday night. It's that start of the break for the Christmas break, because it being the 20th, Christmas falls on a weird day, so you'll have that whole week off for high schools, middle schools, elementary. So fits well for that home opener to be a chance for the Knighthawks to fill seats. Then the next segment that I really want to talk about with this schedule is the sets of 3 and 4 that they play in throughout this season. They have 2 sets of 3 home games back to back to back, and then they've got 1 set of 4 away games near the end of the season. First, let's talk about the slight gauntlet that is going to be Buffalo, Toronto, Vancouver. Now, the thing with Toronto is they're going to be a completely different team at this point next season, and I honestly have no idea what they're going to look like, because they will have added Sam English, Owen Hiltz, and CJ Kirst all to their offensive end. And ultimately, now they just need to figure out a goalie situation, which I think they're still trying to figure out something extra with that. But the struggle part about that is when you play Buffalo on that Saturday, it's off of a back-to-back against Philadelphia that's on the road the night before. So the Knighthawks will be going to Philly, playing in Philly on Friday night on January 9th, then getting on a bus, coming home that night, likely that night. I don't actually know how they'll do it. It would make more sense if they come home that night, wake up, have shoot around, try to have a normal pregame day, and then play another game that night. I hope to God that they do not try to drive back the next morning. I just think for the sake of all lacrosse guys' pregame rituals, that would be terrifying. But so they'll play Buffalo on the second of a back-to-back, then Toronto, and then it's Vancouver in their barn off of a bye. Now, we know the Knighthawks this last season off of a bye were not fantastic. They did not get up for games off of a bye the same way. I don't think it'll be a struggle to get up for the team that knocked them out of the playoffs last year. But with that said, they're still going to have to play against Christian Del Bianco. Not really an easy task to take. That is the first stretch of 3 that will be super exciting, though, all in the month of January and at home there. And I think it's great PR for the team through the month of January in the new year, pitching not 3 consecutive weeks, but 3 weeks out of the 4 in January. There will be home games for the Rochester Knighthawks, and you can start to build that continuity with fans. Then it's 1 week away in Vancouver, and they come right back for 3 more games home through February. So again, building that continuity. Now, this is where my conversation personally comes in of where is the marketing thought process? And I just genuinely don't know 100%, and I would be intrigued to see what the marketing process is, because the Bandits do not play more than 2 games consecutively home or away throughout the entire season. Every month they are home at some point. The Knighthawks have 1 home game in December. They have 3 home games in January, 2 in February, 2 in March, and 1 in April. Just as they get through the back stretch of their season, after March 8th, they're only home 2 times. And one of those is the last game of the season. So it doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about you want to keep people going to games. You got to keep people going to games through that stretch. Then when the playoffs roll around, it's familiar to them and they can get in and buy their tickets for the playoff games. In this circumstance, there is going to be a home game on March 21st, and then there's going to be a home game a month later on April 19th, and then you have to wait a week for playoffs. I just worry that there won't be enough consistency around Rochester for an easy sell for playoff seats with that marketing plan. I could be wrong. But it definitely, there's no way that it's just that it folded out this way, other than the fact that ultimately, it could just fold out this way. That is how the NLL is sometimes. But other quick notes with this schedule as we look through it, that Georgia game, the last game of the season, is on a Sunday. That caps off a 4-Sunday season for this Knighthawks team that did not play a single Sunday last year. I think it's interesting. I think that kind of comes with the fact that the 2 teams in Rochester are no longer working as a cohesive unit. And so when that schedule got put together for the Amerks, it disregarded the schedule for the Knighthawks completely. So when we look at those Sunday games, 2 of them are late in 2026 in that half of the season at home. It's versus Calgary is on a Sunday at the beginning of March, and then against Georgia is on a Sunday at the end or in the middle of April. Also, that Vegas game, a Sunday game, it's at 6 p.m. So we think it's not a matinee. It's in Vegas, so it will be a matinee. And the last Sunday game is the season opener for them, the first Sunday game for them is the season opener. Again, San Diego. So they play 4 matinee games this season. Actually, they play more than 4 matinee games this season. They play 5 matinee games this season because that Saturday at Georgia is a 4 p.m. start. That can change a lot about the way that they go into these games. We always talk about Rylan Hartley being a very routine-oriented player. And if he gets thrown off weirdly based on the time, it can be a scary situation. I just constantly keep thinking back to when I asked Mike Hazen in a press conference last year, is there any way to figure out like controllables for Hartley's like brain space as he goes into a game? And he literally looked at me and said, I wish I had an answer to that question. Which is kind of terrifying, but we all love Ralphie, so we operate with it, and we hope that he can continue to grow as a goalie for the Rochester Knighthawks. But first stretch of the season, as we said, only 2 games in December. One of them will be at home against the Philadelphia Wings 5 days before Christmas to open the home play under the Seneca Nation as the ownership of the Rochester Knighthawks. Could not be more excited for that. Of course, as we get into their preseason, I will be at their preseason games that are at home and making sure that I get updated on any ones that are away. So we will have information for you as that all continues to unfold, ideally photos as well coming with that. One last Twitter check before I go and finish here on the Buffalo Sabres, who are finally practicing with UPL on the ice. And I got to see if anybody came through for us with the post. Bear with me momentarily. It's not looking good. Signs are not high. All we've got is UPL back on the ice. There we go. There we go. We found it. Last second. We got it. All right. Let's run through it real quick. Hellenius Ostland Rosayan, line 1. Fiddler Schultz, Dunn Wahlberg, line 2. Malenstein, Krebs, Danforth, line 3. Quinn, Kozak, Doan, line 4. D pairings, Metza and Rathbone, Merca and Jones, Kesselring and Power, and Georgiev and Levi are the 2 goalies that were matched up for today, along with, of course, UPL being back out on the ice, practicing again, which is great to see. So, a lot of potential Amerks going to be on the ice tonight for the Buffalo Sabres in preseason. Definitely will be a good one to keep eyes close to. For I specifically in this game, I'm going to keep my eyes peeled for Isak Rosayan. I think he still has a lot to try to prove through this preseason. And this is kind of his last year to really do it. So eyes are really peeled on number 18, that leading point scorer in the AHL last season for the Rochester Americans. That's going to do it for this week on Against the Boards. I've been Chamberlain Bauder. Big thanks to my producer, Paul Russo. We'll see you next time.